Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Venture Lab. My name is Andrei Gushchin. I'm Venture Lab Chair. And a few words about Venture Lab. We are a division of MIT Enterprise Forum Northwest, global all-volunteer organization, started by MIT in 1978 with 28 chapters currently worldwide. Our mission is to help entrepreneurs succeed. It is my pleasure to recognize our sponsors, Microsoft BizSpark, Nobby Martins, and Technology MBA program at University of Washington. Also, let me draw your attention to the upcoming events. November 15, Enterprise Forum program, Case of Cloud Computing. December 1st, Startup Demo. As you will learn in a few moments, it might be a good idea for you to attend, to participate. And next Venture Lab, February 9, it will be a presentation by Isilon and Madrona VC partner Matt McElman. Now I would like to introduce our distinguished speakers tonight, Mike McSherry and Cliff Kushler. But honestly, they don't need an introduction. As you all know, Swype is one of the hottest companies in Seattle with very cool technology installed on more than 100 million devices worldwide. And in just 3 years, they went from concept to a successful exit, $102 million. They have a secret for their success. Would you like to know it? MIT Venture Lab. In May 2008, I believe it was Cliff who presented and won in our Venture Lab demo competition, and the rest was easy. Cliff and Mike, welcome to the program, and thank you all for coming, and hope to see you in February.
And thank you for coming from me as well. So where do I begin? Actually, 6 years before the 3 years ago, I had just exited a year or so before that from TG Communications, where we did T9, which was text input on, remember when phones had 12 keys on a keypad back then? So we had a way of typing called T9 that probably most of you are still familiar with. In the process of exiting from that, I was reconnected with Randy Marsden, a colleague of mine. My background is actually in developing technology for people with very severe disabilities that keep them from communicating in the channels that people normally use. So people who are unable to speak intelligibly, to type on a keyboard, to use sign language. So the problem is, how do you develop a system that enables them to communicate their thoughts and needs and so forth? And there's a whole field, albeit a very small one, underlying that I worked in for an unspecified number of decades. And toward the end of that process, met up with a gentleman, Martin King, a very dear friend of mine, who passed away a little over a year ago. But he and his friend and my friend Dale Grover and I came up with the idea of T9 in the context of disability work, where Martin had come up with a very clever eye gaze sensor that he called the OWL, a little ring-shaped circuit board with 8 LEDs that would, infrared LEDs that would be lit up in a raster scan, 8 sensors, and it would detect eye gaze in a very low-cost, robust way, giving you an eye gaze keyboard with 8 keys and leaving us to figure out how are you going to communicate effectively with that. And the answer was the first version of T9, which was actually T7 of 9 was our thought at the time. So exiting from that, reconnected with Randy Marsden, who was one of the few people in the field of assistive technology that really had an interest in pursuing the use of T9 in that realm. And I was able to transfer an SBIR grant to Randy to actually work on integrating the T9 technology. And along the way of helping him with that project, his primary product was on-screen keyboards. So put a full QWERTY keyboard on the screen, have some system to control mouse cursor movement, which traditionally was usually a head motion sensor that would translate head movement into mouse movement on the screen. And the technology historically was move the mouse cursor to the key that you want, dwell on that key for some time threshold. It would activate the key, move on to the next key, move, wait, move, wait, move, wait. More effective than most of the alternatives, but still severely lacking when it comes to input rate. And Randy's question to me was, can't we just get rid of the waiting? Can't we track the movement and figure out what are they trying to spell on that keyboard? And I sat down and thought about it and said, well, I think so. And launched, that was back in the fall of 2002. Started working intensively on the concept of how the technology would work, and took it from concept directly to patent application, forget the implementation, but had a pretty clear path on how I thought it would be implemented. And from our history with T9, it's amazing. If you have an idea and you think there's IP around it, do not delay. Get your ideas down on paper and get them filed, because when the universe has coalesced into a state where there's a technology that would be useful, more than one person will think of it. And you have to expect that they'll be right on your heels. So that would be one of my first pieces of advice, is to file early and file often. What do we have here? So I won't dive into the screen too deeply, but worked on the technology basically as sort of a garage home office, and convinced my dear friend Mark Illing, who couldn't be here tonight, who was also one of the senior developers for T9, to come along for the ride, roll up his sleeves, and help actually develop the software. And he and I worked for quite a long time. Randy had some connections with Hewlett-Packard. And if you think back at the device landscape back in that day, Hewlett-Packard, they acquired Compaq. They had all the iPacs, the Pocket PCs. It was the year of the tablet PC, as we all know, year after year. So we expected that to go somewhere. But Hewlett-Packard was seen as sort of a prime target. Randy had some connections there, and no fewer than 3 times did I get quite a ways down through the process of getting an internal champion, getting them excited, and having them reorged and gone without a word. So we never really got anywhere, and waited for the world to actually catch up and actually start to get interested in touchscreen technology, because our dear friends in Cupertino came out with a little pocket device that many people are familiar with, and demonstrated that, yes, touchscreen technology has legs. I do give myself credit back in 2002 saying, if you're going to have a device that fits in your pocket, and that device is going to do more than enable you to talk to somebody else with a similar device, you're going to be better off with a full touchscreen. When you look at the possibilities for a flexible UI, for receiving information and so forth, the one downfall, as opposed to saying you've got this handheld device, half of the display area is going to get devoted to a touchscreen, the other half to a tiny keyboard that you may or may not be able to use effectively. So anyway, I devoted 6 years, developed technology that did in fact work, and as was mentioned earlier, appeared here in May of 2008, hat in hand, saying, I think this stuff works, and it did at the time. Demos don't always go that way. And I'll share a little story later on that very topic. But as a result of really even the audition phase, I didn't even have to get in and win the demo event. But in the audition phase, where you present to a small panel of 3 or 4 judges, and I'm having a senior moment for Bill's last name. Brian. Yes, Bill Bryant was there. And at the end of my little song and dance, immediately jumped up and said, "We should talk." And subsequently introduced me to Mike McSherry. And I think I will let Mike McSherry discuss what happened from that point on.
Our start was indeed the very first time I think Cliff demonstrated this was to this crowd here 3 years ago. I was not involved in the company at the time. The company name was Forward Input. Notice the pun on word there. Cliff is the master of puns, as you might know if you spend more time with him. And Bill and I were friends, and so he came along. My background, I've co-founded a couple of mobile companies, Boost Mobile, Amped Mobile, and I headed up the product and data services side of that. And I was doing some consulting for Clearwire, and Bill called me up and said, "Oh my God, there's something amazing. Cliff probably needs some help showing it to the OEMs and carriers. You'd be the perfect guy." So I met Cliff, and first I said, "Oh, I'll join as a consultant." I don't know, OEM sales, that's a tough part. Who knows? How many people like this? Who's used it? And Cliff's like, "I don't know. I've been working on it for 6 years. I think it's pretty good." But there's never anybody no beta programs, no demos, hadn't distributed. So there was really not many than maybe 20 people who'd ever played with it in their life. Sure, you'd had meetings, but not necessarily left it behind. And keep in mind, the only touchscreens at the time were Windows tablet computers. So not many people are running around with those. So the market opportunity was pretty small. When I joined, I said, well, we've got to get this out there. And this was the original team out on Vashon Island. I think we had a off-site trying to understand what we were doing and how we were going to go about the market. And there's a fortuitous timing at here, and that was TechCrunch 50. We had submitted our name in for this, and it was a fairly fledgling demo launch startup at the time. And Michael Arrington was doing his Crunch Pad. I don't know if you remember that. He had visions of doing his own tablet. And I remember trying to show them Swype via a Skype video chat. So I'm like holding up a tablet computer, and one computer is showing it on. Like, I don't know what the hell you're showing me, but come on down. And I made plans to come down and meet with Michael Arrington, and this was at TechCrunch was being run out of his home, and it's kind of like a big college dorm in someone's house at that time. And I knock on the door, and they're like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Mike McSherry. I'm here to meet Michael Arrington." And you're like, "Okay." 2 minutes later, someone comes back. He said, "Come back tomorrow." I'm like, shit. Come on, I came down from Seattle, and he's like, "He said he sent you an email a half hour ago. What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Really, I can't come back tomorrow. I'm flying back tonight." So, all right. 2 minutes. Michael Arrington came to the door. "You've got 2 minutes. Show me what you've got." 2 hours later, I'm still showing him Swype, and he's enthralled and wants it everywhere. And he was the first person. I give him credit. You know, at this point we had meetings with half a dozen OEMs, some carriers, and it's really cool. It's interesting. What do other people think about it? I don't know. I haven't done usability studies. I can't make my mind around it. Michael Arrington took one look at it and said, "Front and center, you guys are on stage, absolutely," and kind of bypassed the whole selection process and said, "This is absolutely going to be on stage." So at the TechCrunch 50 event, we eventually got third place there, and that's the quote that the blog had written about us, which instantly catapulted us into a degree of publicity and PR, and had us talking to the OEMs at a different level of having gained some press credibility. So if your business is selling into other opportunities or B2B or even direct to consumer, don't discount the value of press. It's phenomenal because it helps to give credibility. And it's kind of interesting that Michael Arrington would become the voice of the usability experience of the world. But when he said it was cool, the rest of the world thought it was cool, but the OEMs up until that point couldn't make the decision up themselves. Around that time, Cliff had self-funded the company for 6 years. Not many people do that. And there's over 10 years of foregone salary put into Swype between several of us. And It's a pretty unique situation of having a company self-funded and committed to that level and having the means to do such. But around this time, we did a Series A, which is mostly just local angels and well, essentially management and then some local angels. And I think you'd recognize some of these folks up there. And this got us started and was driving us along. But we did not go out and try to raise a large first round initially. We had some contemplations of trying to self-fund the company and drive growth through revenues with OEM deals. But at this point in time, we did not have any OEM deals. We had a cool technology that had gotten some publicity and press out there and among some of the blogs, but we did not have any OEM deals. Our first customer. So this was March 2009, and Samsung cut us a check which involved some upfront exclusivity and a prepaid commitment on, I'll just say, tens of millions of devices. Samsung took a big leap of faith and said, this is going to be a key differentiating technology. We want it. We want an exclusivity period around it, and we want to put this on our devices. Going back a decade before, Samsung was the first licensee of T9. They had a special trust and belief in Cliff and text input as being a differentiating feature on devices. And we are forever indebted to Samsung at making that bet on Swype as being a key feature. In December of 2009, we had signed the Samsung deal. That was our only signed contract at the point, though we were extremely close with Nokia signed. Benaroya Capital, John Carlton, I don't know if many of you around here, fastest meeting to money in bank involved. Keep in mind he was the lead investor at TGIC and probably had, I don't know, 50x return, phenomenal return. So he said, how much do you want? Great, done, money in the bank. So that was very easy, but it's based on the trust of what Cliff had created the first go around and believing what we're doing here at this time. He would have taken more, but he knew that us aligning ourselves with strategic investors would be a very good option. And so he said, I'll give you a cushion to negotiate better against your larger investors that you want to come in for more strategic purposes. So he did us a big favor, and we're tons of gratitude for John Carlton at Benaroya. We got Nokia and Samsung to co-lead investment in us. This is before we launched on a single device. We had never done a beta. At this point, maybe fewer than 100, 200 people had ever played with Swype. So I'll call that anecdotal evidence that Swype was indeed going to become a de facto input perspective on devices. And Nokia and Samsung had never co-invested in a deal before, much less lead on one, but we convinced them that we would be a good opportunity and they would help make us a de facto input standard. So we saw them as the two ideal investors that we possibly could have put together, and we were quite proud, and it worked out quite well for us as we continued to grow. And then on the tail on that round, we took on board Docomo, which is the largest carrier in Japan, and our two investors also put money in. Cliff had self-funded the company for 6 years. We had put a lot of the money in ourselves. We didn't want to take on board VCs that instantly would try to control the company or have a say on the future outcome. As we took Nokia and Samsung, we always said we couldn't give them board seats. It might upset Motorola or LG or HTC. So we ended up, Swype had 3 board seats, and we chose 2 independent directors, of which Rob Burgess was CEO of Macromedia, Macromedia Flash on billions of computers, and Ross Bott was the CEO of Phone.com, which became OpenWave, a new CEO of OpenWave, which put out billions of mobile browsers out there. I think we were the only board in the world that had 3 people that had shipped software in the billions of units between Flash, OpenWave browser, and T9. So that was certainly something we went for operational experience versus venture capital financing, engineering of the board control. So this worked out quite well in our favor, and I think that's one of the things that we had a good negotiating position going in discussions with the venture capitalists, but I think we ended up quite well. Keep in mind this was also through 2008, 2009, which was quite the doldrums in companies getting funded, and that was the Sequoia, rest in peace type time, I think. So we ended up doing quite well at our financing strategy through our early growth. And again, this is before we'd launched on any device. First device we launched on was Samsung Omnia 2, a Windows mobile device. And this was out there competing against the iOS and at that point Android as well. And it just wasn't competitive enough. And we had meetings with Verizon and with Samsung. They were questioning how far they should go at promoting Swype. They weren't sure if maybe we just put it on the device, maybe we'll make it the default of the device. Verizon said, it is the key feature of the device. This is what we're marketing. This is where we're putting our emphasis around. It is the key differentiating feature of this device. Samsung, I don't know if any of you saw the Guinness World Record commercials, but someone using Swype, one of our employees, set the Guinness World Record for the fastest texting speed. And Samsung probably spent $20–30 million on TV marketing campaigns focused around Swype and on speed of texting. And they helped build our brand. And that was a very, very good time for us to be launching Swype on Android, beyond this Windows device, but on Android, because everybody in the market needed a key differentiating feature against iOS. And much of the Android world galvanized around Android has Swype, iOS doesn't. Therefore, it's one of the key elements that makes an Android device better. And of course, we rode that and pushed that messaging as much as we could as well. We also spent a lot of time talking to carriers. And again, when we had launched on that Omnia 2 device, only a couple of hundred people had ever played with Swype in their lives. We're not sure how it was going to perceive at mass market level, and Verizon took a chance at putting it as the main default feature on the device. And Verizon and other carriers did a bunch of usability studies. One was they handed Swype device to people with Swype on it that were used to touchscreen devices. After only 10 minutes of use, 19 out of 20 thought Swype was faster. In reality, only 11 out of 20 were faster using Swype, but that 19 out of 20, 95% perceived Swype to be faster. That carrier made a decision on the spot. Swype is a requirement on all of our devices moving forward. Verizon had done the call down on the Omnia 2. And keep in mind, this was our very first code release on a Windows mobile device. Anyway, almost 2/3 of the people use Swype on the device. 94% of those using Swype said they could not go back to tapping. Incredibly sticky. And so we had the carriers driving all the OEMs saying, this shows phenomenally well in our usability. It's desired. People come into a retail store. It's the easiest thing to show as a differentiating feature on the device. It got marketed quite heavily, and it was certainly helped lead to our success. So we used a virtuous cycle of getting the carrier support, the OEM's commitment, and the end user love in the press and blogs and PR, trying to drive the visibility and our usage differentiation. I'm going to just kind of quickly go through some of the marketing highlights that were garnered around Swype, but certainly I again point out to it helped build our brand, it helped to showcase it, and this certainly helped to lead to our, I guess you might almost say explosive growth. Samsung probably produced 15 different TV commercials around the world showcasing Swype. Brazil, France, South Africa, up in Scandinavia, and Swype was called out in branding in almost all of them. And in that case, Sprint's showing Swype. Samsung sent out teams in the Netherlands. They created websites called superswipers.com. They had people wearing t-shirt, hats, paraphernalia showing people Swype in bars and restaurants. We didn't know any of this. Samsung just took it and ran with it, and thank God we didn't have the marketing funds, but that certainly helped to plant us at the forefront of consumers' minds in text input. There's an example of a billboard in London that Samsung had done. Don't type, just swipe. The product owners of the device were a little upset that their product itself was getting less billing than Swype being a key feature on the device. And we weren't even paying for this, so we were extremely excited to see this. We also didn't know about it. It just got sent to us by friends, or you'd see it in a blog reference or article. All of this was done without us. And actually, per our contract terms, I should have reached out to us for mutual agreement on branding, but I wasn't complaining, mind you. Just some of the TV commercials. You know, this is Mardi Gras. They had big swipe foam hand running through the streets of Mardi Gras and filming it. Who knew? But all fun. Then mainstream publications, New York Times did a big profile piece on Cliff, and we're like, wow, that's making it. Then the Wall Street Journal followed up, CNN, and this is if you guys have not read this article, I'd encourage you to try and do a Google search on it. But it probably goes more in depth about Cliff and his background in life than any of the other articles. But I love this. Cliff wants to talk to dolphins, and I think you guys. Cliff is truly a Renaissance person. I'll let him explain a little bit more. But he was a college hippie dropout. Went traveling around the country for a few years on a motorcycle. Eventually went back to school. Only happened to get a PhD in Tokyo. Speaks Japanese. Black belt degrees, musical instruments. I wish I had half of his genius capabilities. Awards, we were recognized. We won a number of awards, including the WTIA Consumer Product of the Year. I think it was earlier this year. Actually, it was end of last year, and a number of the events. So we've participated here locally, and certainly try to give back to the startup community. And I make myself available for people to help mentor, provide suggestions as they might try and raise funds, et cetera. Let me stop for a second here. People here in the audience, entrepreneurs, raise your hands. Okay. Service professionals, supplying. Okay. Venture capitalists. All right. We left them out. No, I'm kidding. No, certainly helpful and necessary. No, I just want to know the audience that I'm speaking to and what's potentially helpful along the way. Publicity helps. It does. There's no denying that. And love the Seattle publicity. The larger national shows don't hurt as well. And I think when we're up for the best technology innovation in 2008, it was at the Crunchies. And I think at the time the other 4 companies that were up were Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and Swype. And we had 5 people in the company, and here's these massive behemoths. So nice to get recognized at that level, and that certainly catapults you into a different level of discussions with OEMs and venture capitalists, et cetera, as you try to grow. Can't forget the end user. We sell to the OEMs pay us, the carriers influence the OEMs, but it all depends on how the end user is accepting your product and technology and their affinity to it. And there are a number of references like this. This was certainly fun. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tony Hawk, professional skateboarder, 5 million Twitter followers, et cetera. But someone said, hey, you should get an iPhone. And he said, doesn't have Swype on it, sucks. And you can't buy that kind of celebrity endorsement. And it was great that we had a consumer product, but we were going through a business channel. So we had to help build the brand. We did beta groups. We fostered the community. We hired a full-time resource managing Twitter and Facebook and our own community forums. Big active spend on us to work directly with the end users and try to answer their questions, help them understand some feature capabilities of Swype, et cetera. But you can't lose sight of the end user of your product. Even if you're doing B2B sales, there's still an end user who's utilizing that software. And even if you aren't selling to them, you need to understand how they're using it and foster their love and commitment of your product. Our offices were in Fremont for the first few years, first above Pete's Coffee. Well, Cliff and Mark worked out of their homes, and they worked together for 6 years on this. And for a 3-year stretch, neither one of you guys met, even though you only lived 10 miles apart. Just swapped code back and forth all day long. And when I joined and then Aaron joined, Aaron's our COO, we said we need an office. And they started complaining about their lost productivity because they had to commute. So we were becoming real at the time. We started off above Pete's Coffee. That was our first office, and it was fantastic. Outgrew that, and then we moved to in the Adobe complex right there in Fremont, above Blue Moon Burger. And this was a photo taken with the Fremont Troll last year. We had, 30 people in the company or something like that. And so we continued to grow at the time. I joined the company as employee number 3. Aaron, our COO, was employee number 4. And I think after the first year, we ended up, 12 people maybe, not even quite, 35 people after the second year. And at the time of acquisition to Nuance a couple weeks ago, we're 92 people or something like that. So certainly some strong growth in hiring and adding to the local economy here. So where did Swype stand? We launched on our first device essentially in January last year. So we're, 20 months into it. We will ship on over 100 million units by the end of this year. We shipped on 25 million units last year. We'll probably hit about 90 million units this year. So our business model is preloads on devices. Our first customers were Samsung and Nokia, and you knock down the 2 biggest. Hopefully the rest fall. And they did. We signed 9 of the top 11 phone manufacturers in the world and 3 of the top 4 PC manufacturers. We expanded beyond phones into tablets, and we have ongoing conversations right now with TV manufacturers. So Swype not only works with something you touch, but something you point your remote control at or your finger at, Microsoft Connect. Our vision was to be the keyboard for every single screen that you interact with in your daily life. And we were working with the world's largest consumer electronics companies, and they loved the vision that one consistent interface would work across all the devices. I mean, you guys have all played with the different input styles on your TVs or Xboxes or Nintendo Wiis and the hassle, and then you get to your car and it's something even more difficult and complex, and then you move to your phone. They wanted one UI style that fit across all of your daily interaction needs. And that was the vision that we were trying to espouse, and it worked with them because they wanted to breed that consumer loyalty across their devices, working with the same input or interface style across those devices. And we have grown to support, I think it's 55 languages now. So we've launched devices in over 50 different markets, hundreds of devices. They all have different models and makes. So we've been launched globally with over 50 different languages supported, and you can't do a keyboard solution unless you have continuous development plans on that. I remember when we first met with Nokia, they said, great, we want to sign a deal with you. How quickly can you get to 80 languages? Holy cow, we had 5 at the time. But we had a tremendous team. Our language and linguistic team was the original team that worked on TGIC. They had done this before. New tools available to them now, something called the web. It's kind of sprung up in the last 10 years, or longer. But so it's made it a little bit easier. But still, I think we've got 10 to 12 computational linguists at Swype, and you have to get a corpus of. It's one of the most fascinating elements of working with Swype and with keyboard technology. You have to assemble a corpus of all the language. English, 1 million words in the English language. In Swype, we take maybe to say the top 50 to 100,000 words. That would get you to say 98% coverage of all the words that would typically be used in the language. Then you have to assign frequency rankings to each one of those words. The and it, certainly are going to be a much higher frequency than supercilious, for example. And as you do Swype, it's all big probability algorithm. So you're trying to estimate what someone writes. And you need tracking on what they have written in the past, what they've corrected, and you make error recognition changes that get attuned to someone's personal usage of the device. And that is one incredibly complex linguistical challenge as to how to maintain that and keep up with the changes that occur in language and popular lexicon. The OEMs that we signed, certainly the big ones, Samsung was our largest customer. HTC, Motorola, LG, Huawei were growing quite a bit. Nokia on all the different device platforms. We are not on iOS. They haven't opened up their keyboard APIs to us, nor are we on the Windows Phone 7 platform. And they did not open up their keyboard APIs, even though we were on the Windows Mobile 6.5 device. HP just launched their Windows tablet on Windows 7 today. The news headlines picked up that, and it includes Swype. So certainly it's being seen by the OEMs in the space as being a key differentiator, though some of the OSs themselves have not opened themselves up for third-party keyboards to play within their ecosystems. And that's a potential challenge for openness and the mantra of open versus closed systems. We obviously like freedom of choice and prefer the open ecosystems as such, like Android. At that time, earlier this year, we were deciding we should raise some more money. We had plenty of cash in the bank, but one of our board members said, "Man, you guys have good time to raise money, a lot of wind, a lot of success at your back. You could probably raise some money at pretty good terms. You should go out and kick some tires." And all of our earlier funding rounds essentially were well, our Series B was Nokia, Samsung, Docomo, and our 2 board members. They're all in the Bay Area. We wanted to take things back locally, so we had a predisposition for taking in some venture money here in Seattle, and Ignition certainly has a strong background in the mobile environment, and Adrian Smith joined the board of observers, and they had put some money in, and our existing investors joined as well. We closed an early round. We were having some discussions with strategics. We like strategics. They're our friends. At least for our business model, I saw no harm in taking more money from other consumer electronics companies or OS platform companies or carriers, et cetera. And we're having a number of conversations on those fronts. Also, I think most of you are familiar with Swype, the continuous input path style. And we had not launched a Predictive Tap keyboard. And I want to be a little bit careful. I'm not sure how people, when I say Predictive Tap, where you type TJE, it says that's not a word, you must mean the. We had not supported that up until just a couple of months ago. Some of it was due to IP concerns. Some of it was we were looking at differentiation at the core swiping level. But a couple months ago, we decided to launch a Predictive Tap version. And just imagine the iOS keyboard plus swipe in the same interface. Whether you tap, whether you swipe, it still does the error correction that you might assume it to do. And the marketing campaign, the fun little campaign that we went out with, we were kind of saying, why type when you can swipe? And that was I think our first earlier tagline. We kind of were thinking, well, we could say stroke it, don't poke it. That was a little risque, but when we launched this, we said stroke it and poke it. So we were being a little funny on the marketing side, a little risque, and it got a lot of popular blog buzz, and this was a nice little trend for us. But it also poked a hornet's nest, and that's Nuance, much larger company than Swype. I think their market cap is $8 billion now. And we obviously had some conversations with them. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but TJIC, Cliff's earlier company, Nuance bought 3-4 years ago. So they owned a competing text input style. They had tried to launch a competing product, which they called T9 Trace in the market. Had not been received as well, but certainly it was putting some competitive pressure on us at deal negotiation level, even if it wasn't seen as being as robust as Swype. But certainly when we launched our Predictive Tap version, it was picking a hornet's nest at Nuance and saying we were going after their core business. So that's when we announced the acquisition with Nuance, and that was, I think, essentially about 4 weeks ago to this day. We always knew that they were on the short list of potential buyers. We had on and off conversations for literally 5 years with them, right, Cliff? And I think we just got to a sweet spot where we'd signed all the OEM customers. We had a strong and growing brand, and we were launching highly competitive products to their core offerings. And they put together an offer that we just thought made sense. At the same time, we're also seeing voice increase at an input level with the launch of Siri. Obviously, it's at the forefront of many people's minds. Voice and text input should be together. They're shared language models, they're shared dictionary sets, they're shared personal words that you might use that you'd want to share across voice and text input. So we weren't immune to the synergies of working with them and their larger portfolio of offerings. And they put together a package deal that we thought met our criteria and goals for what we wanted to achieve with Swype. It's kind of funny getting the brands and the bands back together again. Certainly, there are still several people that Cliff had worked with back in the TJIC day or had hired that are still at the Nuance text input teams. So kind of fun to see the integration and start having meetings here. Something I'd like to point out as a funny aside that many people might not know. T9, when Cliff started that company, they started on Vashon Island, back to the hippie roots that I mentioned earlier. But and they worked with an ad agency to come up with the brand for their product. And they just so happened to work with the same ad agency that also named K2, as in K2 skis. K2, T9, Cliff's first product name for Swype, Z1. So keeping with the alphanumeric ingenuity there on branding, I'd like to think that Aaron and I brought a little extra branding oomph, like we got to change the name. Cliff had the name Swype in his back pocket. He just wasn't using it. I don't know, forward input, Z1, Swype. I think we all made the right choice with going with Swype. And this is the team that I think this was taken about 2 months ago, maybe just a month ago. 90 some employees. I'm not sure if they were all in there now, but we're in Pioneer Square. Certainly a growth area in terms of startups and gentrification in that area, and it's been fabulous for us. Our commute, so Nuance, 5 blocks south. We're both right along 99, just 5 blocks south. Very easy commute, and when we took a look at potential acquirers, et cetera, some of them might want you moving to California, some of them might moving to the east side, et cetera. This is the least disruptive for the teams in terms of how we'd stay integrated as a team and bring what we had been working on together into the new entity. So this certainly helps in integration from my point of view. And again, our goal, as we've always said, is input on billions of screens and across multiple different device categories and platforms. I think we're out there achieving it with Nuance. They've got scale and already are working in a variety of these other platforms, and I think this just helps to propel Swype further in that front. A little perspective, I came across this somewhere recently. There actually aren't that many exits over $100 million. On average, it's about 50 per year, and that's over the past 12 years. Adrian Smith from Ignition actually told me that in mobile, there's less than 10 per year on average over the last 12 years. So we're somewhat an elite company on achieving that, and I think we did in pretty good stead. Someone mentioned earlier that it all started 3 years ago. It started a decade ago with Cliff working on this, and it's the commitment and foresight of one unbelievable individual at putting his time and energy into something he thought would first off help people with disabilities, then later had mainstream ramifications for what we could do with this in the world. So to that end, Cliff, thank you very much. We hijacked, my COO drives a POS van. It was all dented and rusted out, et cetera. And about a month and a half ago, we stole his van and brought it down to Mako and painted it Swype orange and put all these stickers on it. So if you see a bright orange van driving around town, you'll know where it comes from. So any questions? We're quite pleased with, we built a family, and there's some loyalty amongst the people that we'd hired, and felt like we hired friends. And so when you sell to someone, you're a little bit concerned, and of course you spend your time negotiating on the price and things like that, not necessarily on the integration plan, because you don't know that much that early. But very, very pleased, and I think it's a very good outcome for everyone in the company. Everyone at Swype had options. I don't know how familiar everyone is here with options, but at Swype, most companies have a 12-month cliff on vesting on options, and before the deal closed, we convinced our board and investors that we should accelerate everyone by 12 months on their options. So even if people were there 6 months, they then all of a sudden got 18 months vesting on the options. So every single person in the company made money, and it was a very good outcome for everybody that was involved. One of the other things that I didn't mention, but we're quite pleased and proud of, when Nokia and Samsung invested, their investment was not they had broader motives. We're strategic partners. We're helping them to grow their industry. They want to see independent competitors start up in the text input space, and they were also familiar with TGIC and you know the research done out of disabilities. So before they invested, we set aside 2% of the company for a disability foundation, and so when we just sold the company, that 2% got carved off and actually funded. So we're sitting on a disability foundation with a couple $1 million, and that we now get to decide how we spend in assistive technology research and development and or just straight charitable cash giving. So we're quite pleased and proud that we were able to accommodate that through our investment cycles. The question was licensing deals and how we thought through it. Offer what the market will bear. You know, Samsung set the, we signed that exclusive deal with Samsung up front, and they prepaid for a large licensing deal. So that kind of set the standard for our business, and we weren't going to undercut that deal. You know, special relationship with Samsung and things. So that kind of set the market, and we negotiated hard up front with them. We know what the T9 licensing is, and keep in mind T9's been put on, I think, 8 billion phones to date. And at 8 billion, you're not collecting $1 per device. It's down in the pennies and tens of cents, depending on volumes and things like that. With Swype as an early differentiating product, we knew we could get more than that. We didn't know how quickly it would sort of drop in per unit pricing. And so I think we ended up probably a little less than, no, actually, I think on our business model that we projected in our very first business plan, we ended up being quite close to that. So we were pretty close in the projections, but keep in mind, you know, our CFO is CFO of TGIC. We kind of knew the market into which we were selling into. So we knew how to project that model. We thought maybe for tablets that, you know, they sell more than a phone, key differentiating feature, we could charge more for tablets. No, they're operating at lower margins than even phones. It's highly competitive, more devices, but you can't sell them for $1,500. So tablet pricing ended up being essentially the same as mobiles, and they don't have the volume. And because of the larger screen real estate, people want to get more creative in what they can do on tablets. So I would say in some cases it was more of an R&D effort versus cost recovery at say tablets for us. And when you take a look at phones or TVs or in-car, I mean, people are, of course, going to want all these different whiz-bangy things that you might be able to do there. Yet at the same token, they probably don't want to pay dollars per device for an input software technology there. Something else that sprung up, and it's probably a challenge for everybody in what they're doing, is there's a drive towards more free software. Google Android is free, and they've got a keyboard. It's not as refined and I wouldn't say is as competitive, but when you talk to an OEM and say, you know, I want you to pay me 50 cents per device, like I've got this other option that's free, you kind of have to split the middle there somewhere and say, yeah, ours is better, but you know, at what point is it too expensive for it being that better differentiating technology? So many companies have found themselves facing off against Google's free alternatives and needing to differentiate on a variety of different levels there. That answer your question? Yeah. We did not. It was just the question was income streams prior to those licensing deals. No, but as a startup, we cared about cash flow more than anything else. So we always drove for our licensing deals to include prepaids. And I think we had five different OEM deals that include $1 million plus prepaid licenses. So we were sitting on plenty of cash in the bank. Our actual revenue royalty reporting didn't necessarily reflect that because we couldn't accrue the revenue until we actually shipped the devices. But we negotiated hard for these large upfront prepaid commitments, and we would offer discounts on the licensing streams on the back end. Because as a startup, I cared about the initial cash coming in the door. The keyboards I'll just leave it at that. We certainly were looking at alternative licensing or alternative revenue streams that could get created off the presence, the distribution, the scale that we had.
just out of curiosity, was differentiation really the key thing for the carriers, or was there something else that you were positioning there that was beyond just the differentiation of the input?
Well, much to Cliff's chagrin, because he wanted to make sure that people could use it better. When I was out there selling it, early days, I could almost like, do you really care if someone uses it? You're paying, I don't know, call it, 20 cents per device, and it's so great at a marketing level and at a PR level, and someone coming into the retail store, and what a great showcase. If you can sell a device without it and it doesn't work, someone could just go back to the regular keyboard. So that's the most cynical take on it, is to your question. But we knew that wouldn't last unless the people actually used it, saw that it worked, and it reflected upon their usage style and commitment to that to the swipe style of keyboard input. So to your original question, differentiation was an early factor, especially when they're trying to outmarket and have some differentiation against the iOS, but it would not lead to long-term success unless it had distinct usage benefits for the end user. Yeah.
I think it's a very, very impressive story, and I think that a lot of companies who were less impressive, they sold for quite a lot more. They exited for more than you did. The impressive roster of the prices you want and things like that, and you had all the carriers, all the device manufacturers, bar two, wrapped up, and so on. How did you make the case to your board and your investors that this was such a fantastic offer that you absolutely had to take it? Were they threatening to litigate you because of this tap thing, Nuance? Because that difference between the size of Nuance and you is so great. I don't get it.
Oh, look, we'd all like to sell for more, right? That's what every entrepreneur goes through. Do I sell now or do I go bigger? And we, I said that we had started a fundraising round and raised some money, and we had a rather large investment commitment from a strategic investor, and I could have raised another $15 million with a 25% dilution, or I could have sold. And when we sold, kicked tires around, and nobody, Nuance was the best fit for us, and offering the most. And if people weren't going to exceed that at that point in time, you raise a significant amount of money, take the dilution, you go at it for another year or two. What further success would we be creating? Signing OEMs number 15 through 20? Is that going to move the needle? Getting on 200 million devices versus 100 million devices, is that going to move the needle? So where we would have had to have hit is on some of these alternative revenue streams, to your earlier question. And that's increasing our scale risk to a different level. Nuance is an 800-pound gorilla in the input space across voice and text. And we had a very, very significant IP position. They had some IP. There could be an overhang of people just not wanting to enter into that space, not knowing what the situation was there. So I think we made the best deal for where we stood in the market and what we had achieved.
Hi, Tim Shaw, and I'm wondering about IP competition and in the gesture space in particular. I recall when I first heard about your company, and this was 2 years ago or so, I remember looking into it a little bit, and that there was another company that had claims that were very similar to yours in terms of the kind of work you were doing, and there seemed to be crossover in terms of IP. I wonder how you handled that.
Well, it's certainly more in Cliff's domain than mine. Do you want to take that, Cliff?
As it turned out, Randy's initial investigations into this approach, he'd actually filed a Canadian application disclosing some of his thoughts on how this could be done, but that was actually the first stake in the ground in this whole realm of a continuous trace input style. You may be referring to ShapeWriter that came out of IBM and spun off into its own company. The other approaches that were out there were based on a sort of academic perception that the fundamental advantage of this approach is that an end user could actually memorize sort of an iconic shape for a given word, and that you would actually memorize the path pattern. So for the word this, you know, THIS, so that is now a gesture that I can perform anywhere on the screen, irrespective of a keyboard, and it becomes a head-up input method for 100 to 200 words if you're willing to memorize those gestures, and then for the rest of your text input, you're back to looking at the keyboard and tapping away or something. So it was probably not fully fleshed out in terms of this is the foundation for really a practical mass input method that people are really going to adopt on a wide scale. Their approach morphed a little bit over time to try to accommodate larger vocabularies and whatnot, and actually ended up with an approach that really comes closer to what we had done from the get-go, at least as soon as, once I got involved and filed the original Swype patents and whatnot, where we were looking, you know, my firm belief was, for this to work on a sizable vocabulary, it has to be done with respect to a keyboard. You can't just be doing it out in space. There isn't enough distinction to reliably recognize something. And for any kind of text input technique, your recognition rate has to be very, very high. If you're having to correct, you know, 1 word out of 5, and people are going to say, forget it, I'll just tap it out, you know. So you have to be in the 95, 96, 97% plus recognition rate to get any kind of wide adoption. All that to say, it does hark back to my comment earlier that indeed there were multiple people looking at this problem, and you may be aware of some others in that. I'm not actually going to speak at greater length about some of the interesting relationships there are in the universe, but it's not all unrelated. Yes?
Hold on just 1 second, please. I wonder if I can pass you the mic so we can capture questions.
From a operations standpoint, how were those initial meetings with Samsung? And when you found out that they had interest, when they came to you, what challenges did you face initially, if any?
I guess strongly asserting the value of what you were putting on the table in the absence of hard data to support that. So we certainly had a strong belief that yes, this is a great input method. Everyone who gives it a try, not everyone, but the vast majority of people who spend enough time to try it say, wow, this is great. And that the initial study, which hadn't happened yet when you talked about some of the carrier studies, that phenomenon that it's just fun. There's just something about sliding your finger around on the keyboard and seeing the word appear, and this, how did it do that? That the entertainment value of that sort of distracts you from how much time you're spending entering text, and that level of enjoyment and distraction actually amplifies the impression that you're doing it very quickly.
That was the most stressful time of Swype's existence, from my perspective, was the days, weeks, months leading up to signing that Samsung deal. We're picking up payroll costs, the staff was growing, we were hoping that we'd sell it into an OEM. Samsung was talking to us, they were the fastest growing OEM, it would have been phenomenal. And they took it to the wire in negotiating with us before executing and signing that contract. We signed it the night before a CTIA event, and I sort of gave that to them as a deadline. We were also talking to LG, and so I had the pressure on them that there were other people bidding on this initial exclusivity deal. And fortunately Samsung and LG are cutthroat competitors, and that helped us at trying to close this deal down. Again, at this point, nobody had used Swype. It was all anecdotal. Hey, do you like it? Hey, do you like it? Okay, but there weren't hundreds or thousands, or you weren't an app store that had user ratings of thousands and things along these lines. And so Samsung took a bet on us, and thankfully.
And the next stressful period was when we actually had to deliver the software for Samsung to put out in the marketplace. And interestingly enough, that's that first device, the Omnia 2, was a touchscreen phone, but it was in fact a resistive touchscreen, which historically was used with a stylus. But they said, we'll leave the stylus out. You just use your finger. And when you've spent 8+ years or however long it was developing this input technique that says, okay, there's a touchdown event and a continuous trace and a touch and a release. And when you have a resistive screen and you're using this fleshy finger, it's amazing how erratic that mouse data can start to get. So we had to do all kinds of extra filtering algorithms and say, oh, it looks like they lifted their finger and put it back down again, but in fact, we know better. That was all one word. So it was very interesting. And they would, change the mouse driver without really telling us and say, oh, we're having these troubles now. And I had actually been foolhardy enough to take a vacation and go out on a houseboat on the Mississippi River. And there was quite a crisis that happened. There was kind of a James Bond extraction from the Mississippi River with a speedboat meeting a boat and carrying me off and zooming off to an airport and flying back to Seattle to get the Samsung delivery done. But it did happen.
Hey, Cliff, so as the founder or co-founder of the company, what's the process you go through in terms of determining the timing to bring in, someone like Mike to kind of, focus on the technology and have someone come in to focus on the business side?
Randy was, I'll say, unhappy with me at times. With my experience in TGIC and other experiences for developing input systems, I had a very strong belief that it has to just work. You have to be able to give it to somebody without deep understanding and they can put their finger down and by Jove, it works, or you're not going to get anywhere. And we almost drove TGIC out of business in the very early days. We were a bunch of engineers and we looked at the problem saying, okay, you've got a small set of keys, you've got multiple letters on each key, you have this disambiguation process, and how do we make that work as efficiently as possible? And it's actually quite a complicated problem, and we came up with a genetic algorithm to try to allocate letters to keys in a way that makes it maximally efficient. So you occasionally will have a collision that you've got two words with exactly the same key sequence. You make it most efficient by having the most frequent one come out first, and looking at all that, you can get it to 1 word in 100 requires an extra keystroke by optimizing the layout. And so we went out to the world saying, number one, we have this new input technique where you don't have to tap once for an A, twice for B, 3 times for C. It's just 1 tap per letter. And look, you forget about that silly ABC layout, which nobody really cares about anyway, and you have this marvelous layout where you put the L and the Z and the O together on one key. Oh, don't worry about it. It works great. Trust us. And got to where, first of all, no one would understand the concept of disambiguation over the phone. We had to get in front of somebody. And then we'd somehow miraculously get in front of somebody and show them this keyboard with scrambled letters on it. And they would look at each other and look at their watches. And we were probably a month away from closing the doors when we finally said, okay, it's less efficient. Let's see if anybody's interested in the ABC layout. And they were. But you learn from those experiences. You have to have a gut feeling of knowing when the product is really ready, despite the impatience of some of those around you, and wait until the time is really right. And once it's right, I did spend some time looking around for the right individuals when I was blessed by the opportunity to meet Mike. And I have to say, we had a relationship based on trust right from the get-go that is very unusual in my experience and was a key part of the success of the company. We also created a company culture. Virtually all the people involved in the early stages had young children, and we just said, getting a startup off the ground is a lot of work, but we all have lives, and we're going to continue to have lives, and we'll make this happen without giving up that aspect of our life. And it was a very successful venture.
Cliff and I worked
Just-
together for the first 6 or 8 months on a handshake. No contract or written document.
Can you talk, can you talk about other potential acquirers? Were you talking to other potential acquirers and why it shook out the way it did?
Sure.
Look, Nuance was the most obvious company. I mean, we always said there was a short list: Apple, Microsoft, Google, Nuance. And Nuance is the one that had the best opportunity to exploit this at the global level of what we wanted. They had an offer on the table, and it looked good to us, and we saw the synergies of having worked with them in the past, and it was the best deal for us to go forward with.
Hold on a second, please.
Sorry, it was an OS level play, most likely. OEMs themselves aren't necessarily, taking the steps at owning a singular input technology. Chipset companies, potential, but they've dabbled in OSs, but they're not making that grand scale play. You're pretty much looking at the OS companies or Nuance, and Nuance certainly has the most to benefit from extending Swype into all of their different product platforms that they've shipped. Again, I think T9 has been put on 8 billion devices to date. Their voice input technology has been put on billions of devices, and we always looked for scale goals.
So a broader question to that. The venture guys always want to know what your exit strategy is going to be. I'm wondering if you always had one from the beginning, and how important that is to the entrepreneur.
We chose our venture guys that didn't have the exit strategy. Samsung and Nokia were not concerned about us selling. They wanted us to grow as an independent company and serve at offering solutions for them. So they were not that concerned about exit strategies. And for the amount of money that they put in, it's more beneficial for them to have an independent alternative in the input space than the returns that they'd get off Swype. So when we were, we had offers from venture capitalists, and we talked about, hey, we might want to grow this. Could be a lifestyle business. Who knows what we want to do? Cliff self-funded it for 7 years. I don't want to be forced into exiting the business on someone else's time schedule. And so some of the venture capitalists, wanted redemption rights and buyback opportunities if you guys aren't going to sell it, because they weren't going to, control the board and things like that. And Nokia and Samsung just trusted us. They said, you guys, you've done it in the past, you'll do it here again, we trust you. So we went in actively not wanting an exit scenario that we had to define up front with our venture groups. And but things change. Nokia gave up its OS platform strategy essentially. They went with Windows Phone 7. We can't get on Windows Phone 7 platform because of some Microsoft decisions at this point in time. So their investment thesis for what they might have invested in us shift as well. And when you take a look at what's happening in the marketplace, we couldn't get on Windows Phone 7 platform. We're not on iOS platform. Thankfully, we're on Android, and we're on MeGo, and where might that go? And we're on this new Tizen platform that Intel and Samsung have announced, and we've launched stuff on Windows 7 tablet computers, but we don't know Windows 8, their open API strategy. So as you take a look at what's out there in the marketplace, you don't quite know how things are shifting. But back to your original question, we kind of went in with the premise saying we don't want to be driven by your investment dollars at driving us towards an exit. We'll see as we grow this business what transpires. And fortunately, with Nokia and Samsung, it matched their investment expectations and thesis. Other VCs might have, driven for that more up front. We knew that, there's a question of feature product company. I don't know if you guys have, come across that term. And some of the early investors like, oh, you're just a feature, someone's going to buy you out. well, we grew a company, we got profitable, so are we a feature product company? And we didn't want to be driven into having to choose paths up front because of investor expectations.
Hold on just a minute, please.
Thank you. How reliant was the success of Swype on T9? If you take the whole history of T9 away, and you imagine, the invention of Swype without that experience, and how would it have been different? Would it have been possible?
I believe it would have been possible. It certainly would have been harder. Certainly the credibility that we had from that background got us in the door. I'd say we got in the door the first time with T9, which might have been even harder to demo and get across than Swype was. I mean, we still had to get in front of people and show them a demo and so forth, but certainly also with the environment had, events like TechCrunch existed back in 1995 when we started T9. That would have been quite helpful too. So I think it would have been harder, but definitely still possible.
Yeah, at a sales level, it gave us credibility. I mean, there wasn't a meeting that we essentially couldn't have, whether or not it went anywhere or not, but certainly it was good for our first round of meetings and discussions. At a technical level, everyone builds upon past experience. We had to get to 60 languages, and they had done that before, and understanding syntactical language construction of different languages, or understanding text input, the differentiation between processing speed and memory footprint on the device, and how you correlate those two at the maximum efficiency on number of words that you put into the language database and things like that. You build upon past experiences. Certainly we stood heads and shoulders above some of the other people that were competing in the space, given on the past experience that we had. On the business side, we hired people out of T-Mobile, we hired people out of Microsoft, we hired people out of OEMs. I've been in the mobile industry for 12 years now, having been on carrier side and content side and media, and so I knew OEMs and carriers and how to work through that. So you just hire the skill sets that are needed, but one thing is deep domain expertise and text input, and having a text input technology work across dozens of languages is not an easy skill set to come by. So to that extent, building upon past experiences is a tremendous leg up.
You are a great success story, and you are very good working together, as I can see. But let's say you go back to 3 years ago. What would you do differently?
Well, do you want to take the first stab at it, or?
Go, feel free.
Still
thinking.
I actually, we were quite fortunate in our success. We didn't have too many downs in our growth. Discounting Cliff's 6 years of code development, I had the easy job of just showing it. I always joked I was just Vanna White, swipe me an A. I've got the easy job to look at and show off a beautiful product he had created. When Nokia and Samsung invested in us, there was another OEM that wanted to invest alongside. And they were very, very late to the game. They came in at the very end stage of our investment close, and they wanted to invest, and we said no. We had signed the Samsung deal 6 months ago, very, very close to signing the Nokia deal. We've been in discussions with them for months, feeling quite confident on that. Why should I let you in when you're just coming late to the game? Probably should have done it. And we played chicken with them. They said, oh, we're not going to sign a deal with you then. Unless we can invest, we're not going to sign a deal. They did sign the deal, but we should have just included them at that point in time. So I think maybe we were a little cautious on the equity dilution up front, whereas we should have been more focused on winning friends and de-risking the business. But again, Cliff especially had been at this for so long. You don't want to give up too much equity dilution. So that was a game of chicken that we played. Whereas maybe we should have taken their money when it was being offered. We never did go in the Android App Store, and we were always asked about that. And I know for one, like Google employees didn't use Swype very much because they were constantly doing new builds of Android on a daily basis. And because we weren't in the Android App Store, when they'd get a new build of Android on their device, Swype would break. They'd have to go to our website, log in, download a new version, and it was just too cumbersome a problem for them to bother keeping up with it. So Google employees didn't use Swype very much, from what I understand, because they were all on their own Nexus S, and internal devices. So we always contemplated a little bit more. If we had played a little harder in the App Store, would we have gotten greater visibility and greater promotion? When Samsung cut this exclusive deal with us, we didn't intend to do beta distribution or be in the App Store, but someone had cracked open Samsung's operating system and extracted out Swype, and so it was being freely distributed out on the web. And there was a timeout expiration in there, so it timed out. So all of a sudden I had thousands, tens of thousands of people pissed at me because my software wasn't working anymore. And well, they're the ones ripping it off and using it, and it expired. And like, well, why aren't you in the App Store then? I'd pay for it. You guys are to blame because my software is not working anymore. And in the meantime, Samsung's saying, what are you guys doing giving away your software for free when I'm paying tens of millions of dollars to market you? And so you understand the dichotomy of, do I want tens of millions of dollars marketing dollars, or do I want to be in the App Store and get some people to pay me a couple bucks per app download? And we always said that our business is OEM distribution. That beta has grown to now there's a couple million people who go to our website, registered their information and download via that. We don't pay for it. It's just a free open beta community, but we are not in the App Store. App Store would have been significantly easier distribution. I think we're in about 70 to 80% of all the Android devices launched in the US. Pretty damn good penetration, and probably 45% globally. So if we're in the App Store, you might pick up on the remaining people that don't have access to it. It wasn't preloaded on their device. But still, you get into end user customer support, language download capabilities. How the hell do I know how to troubleshoot if someone's Icelandic version is working on some Chinese ODM Android device in Iceland? How do I do support for that? And we just couldn't fathom that. So we went with the OEM distribution model to where it was tested, distributed upfront, and that was our business model. But we still sort of question, what if we had done some direct-to-consumer distribution? How might that have changed things of being more accessible, being more used by a more broad population? But we had to make a business model decision and ultimately a support decision. Those were maybe two questions that I had for things might have done differently.
Well, I guess I had a last question. Thank you very much. It was one of the most interesting and impressive presentations I've seen in a long time. So thank you for coming, and good luck to you in your next career.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're all just waiting for what Cliff's going to invent next that I can join.